colleagues, welcome to this webinar. I would ask that, Diane, we are going to sort of just have people connect their camera connected when it's their turn to speak. Thank you. Colleagues, it's a great pleasure to greet you. Welcome for this webinar. We're focusing today, as you know, on business leadership in disability inclusive response to COVID-19. A few logistical issues from my side. As you can see on the screen, we have two international sign interpreters. We also have closed captioning, which if you need it, you will need to click on the button below, which says CC, closed caption. There you can also then increase the size if the size is too small, or modify the font size. We've already started recording the webinar. So that is happening. We are also for the first time broadcasting the webinar on Facebook. And we hope that will also be a success, and hopefully that will increase significantly the number of people following the webinar. The webinar has three different sections. A first section that will be moderated by Caroline Casey, to whom I will give the floor immediately. A second section with three additional speakers, which I will be moderating, and then a final section with some shorter presentations from some of the members of the ILO GBDN. As you know, this webinar is jointly organized between Valuable 500, thanks a lot, Caroline, for that, and the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. And without further ado, and hoping that our three speakers, the moderator and our two speakers for this first session are all three on the call, I give the floor over to you, Caroline.
Firstly, I am absolutely... Hello. So we have Matthias and Paul. Do we have your videos up?
Hello. I'm not allowed to put it on. I'm stopped, I was told.
Okay, well now you can come on. So bring on your beautiful faces so we can see them, for those of us who can see well. Hello, Matthias. Paul.
How are you doing? Good seeing you.
Ah, there we go. Hello, gentlemen. Firstly, both of you, thank you so much for joining us today for this short conversation. I guess the real critical issue is, as we come and move towards economic recovery and resetting our business systems, which we know we need to do, we need to ensure that disability is equally included in this. Now look, this pandemic has wreaked havoc. And I think it has exposed the huge inequities in the world, this is for sure. But number two, it has also shown that business systems can change and adapt. And that is exciting for us to move forward to resolve some of the inequities in the world. And number three is that we've seen a lot of the solutions, particularly around communication, that have enabled us all to talk to each other, to come from the lived experience and the insights of people with disabilities. So we are delighted to have two sides of the coin. We have Matthias, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers. And we also have Paul Polman, a dear friend of mine, who is many things, but he's the co-founder of Imagine, which you see in the background, and he's the chairperson of the Valuable 500. Also the chair of Global Compact, and the ex-CEO of Unilever. So, Matthias, I'm going to move to you first. I'm an over-talker, so I have to keep it short. In the organization that with the International Organization of Employers, what are some of the initiatives or measures that you're putting in place in some ways to offset the impact, the negative impact of the pandemic, and also for the recovery?
Thank you so much for the question, and good afternoon, good morning to all of you. For us, it's important to have a focus on SMEs, on small and medium-sized enterprises. There are altogether more than 430 million companies who are in real danger of going down to going bankrupt, and many of them are SMEs, and that's for two reasons. First of all, SMEs have less cash, they have less assets actually, and secondly, they are very much in sectors which are very much impacted by the crisis. For instance, the retail sector. More than 70% of all employees in the retail sector are coming from SMEs. So what needs to be done, and what is the key focus? When you ask SMEs, the key focus needs to be on access to finance, on cash, right? and deferral of taxes, deferral of social security contributions, and these kinds of questions. Governments have done a lot of measures in this regard, but what we see is that they don't really reach the real economy. And that's for different reasons. Sometimes they show that we get better access to finance for SMEs. What IB is doing, what you have asked, we have engaged together with the ITUC, the International Trade Union Confederation, together with Industry All, local employers federations, local trade unions, and a lot of international brands on an initiative to bring funding into the garment industry, to ensure that the garment industry in producing countries like Bangladesh, Myanmar, Pakistan, India, get access to finance to secure business continuity, and that there is support for workers' income. Because in many of these countries, you don't have social protection system. So workers, when they are impacted by restructuring, are standing in front of a catastrophe. Another big ticket item for SMEs, they're not clear enough about government measures. There's not clarity about, can I open, can I not open, under which conditions can I open, when can I open, these kind of questions. And that we hear from companies, but we hear also very much from our member federation. So we really much engage on calling for governments to be confident. You're doing business on the spot, you're doing policy on the spot with the crisis, but we need more clarity. In our member federations, 150 countries around the world, representing 50 million companies, they're very much engaged on that. And the last point, it's about how to make sure that workers going back to work, they are safe. How to ensure that social distancing can be implemented. So a big effort from our side is to give guidance to companies in how, with regards to OSHA, with regards to making a safe return to the office, to the workplace. So thank you so much for the question.
So thank you, Matthias. I think what you're speaking to is the experience of small and medium-sized organizations is profoundly different to the large multinationals, and also dependent on where we are in the world, which I think there is not one blanket solution, right? Paul, to your experience leading a multinational and listening to what Matthias is talking about, many of these organizations are going to be taken out. So when we think about there's an opportunity now for it to be prioritized, or do you think it's actually going to fall down the priorities list, considering everything else that business has to face? What are you feeling or sensing from the business community?
Well, thanks, Caroline, and thanks for the opportunity. And it's good to see everybody. And Matthias, thanks as well. I agree with you that the SMEs are the backbone of any economy, and they are the ones most vulnerable. People think that 20 to 30% of the SMEs will disappear potentially. So that's where we need to put our attention. I also quickly changed my background, Caroline, so that it now says the valuable 500. I was totally off script here before I came on. So I apologize for that. But there's no doubt that COVID has been an enormous shock to the system that we've seen, bigger than anything in the history of mankind that we can remember. And actually, many have suffered as a consequence. More than ever, it showed the weakness in our economic system. Not only are we facing a health crisis with COVID, but I think people are starting to understand that it's also an economic crisis, a financial crisis, a social crisis, a governance crisis, and dare I say now also a racial crisis. So I think that one of the key conclusions coming out of this crisis is that we cannot have healthy people on an unhealthy planet. And the links between health, climate, biodiversity, and social inclusion, if you want to, are now better understood. And that should also help for the community, the 1.3 billion community of people with disabilities. Now the poor, including the people with disabilities, which are disproportionately represented amongst the poor, in my opinion, actually suffered the most from this crisis. The S of ESG, environmental, social, and governance, the S part has come up, that we really can see that our economic system is really a system that excludes too many people, and including the people with disabilities. So I think it's a good thing that the S is moving up. The focus has been on saving lives, saving livelihoods. Matthias talked about it, keeping these companies alive, protecting jobs, but it has also brought more light on the way we treat employees, the way we treat the people that are in our value chains, the way we put a social network around things. And increasingly, you see the financial market being interested as well. During this crisis, it's actually interesting that the social aspect has got more attention from the financial market than perhaps even from some of the businesses. So it's no doubt that we have our jobs cut out for ourselves, what we need to do. And we need to recognize, especially in COVID, with the COVID crisis, as you rightfully say, that people with disabilities who were already vulnerable from the start had less likely access to education or healthcare or jobs, are also the ones that are most affected by the COVID crisis. So to some extent, we've actually moved backwards, in my opinion. People with disabilities are amongst the most exposed, and obviously the pandemic has further amplified that. And a good example of that is actually to look at the death rates that we see regretfully also in your country, in Ireland, the UK, in these retirement homes, etc. Or policies on access to healthcare based on age or disability. It's a scandal, if you think about it, that we still have to face these issues in today's world. So if these people face difficulties before the COVID crisis in terms of finding jobs or inclusion in the workplace, we have to be realistic that as a starting point where we are now, it is not going to be easier. We would fool ourselves. We have to work twice as hard to be on the agenda and to be included in many aspects. And that's why it's so important that we are fighting collectively, all of us, for the rights and inclusion of people with disabilities. We all have to think about the moment now, which has arrived on how do we build back better. And as you've said many times, Caroline, it's an 8 trillion spending opportunity, people with disabilities. It's potentially a 7% of GDP lost at a time that we need it most as we rebuild. So this is an opportunity to put it right. And I'm actually very pleased to see that 260 CEOs of the biggest companies have signed up for the valuable 500 and saying, hey, we're going to do something about it. And since social inclusion is now higher on the agenda, we're going to do something faster about it. So we need to seize this opportunity and design this inclusive growth in all of its senses. And I must say, racial issues are tremendously sad to see and need to be attacked, but they should not go at the cost of inclusion for all the other people. And the people with disabilities are obviously a priority of that. So I think there are some things that actually will help people with disabilities. If we look at it from the positive side, the shift in work environment and how quickly we've been able to adapt to the home environment, I think could potentially be a benefit to many people with disabilities. These flexible arrangements that come out. The way that we have accelerated technology and have probably done in 2 months what would have taken us 5 years, I believe will help people with assisted devices or people with disabilities who actually have more experience and are more agile and etc. to deal with this. And then increasingly, we obviously see the alternative and flexible arrangements around work coming up and the awareness of actually positive. I hope that governments will now once and for all build these plans better with taking total inclusion in mind, not leaving anybody behind. And that means placing people with disability at the center of the recovery and the response efforts. And that's what we all should be fighting for. So the best times are ahead.
Well, it just shows you that you and I haven't had an update in 10 days. We're up to 284.
I apologize. This is great news.
I apologize, but it's going to lead me into my next question to Matthias. That's incredible because we've had 40 companies join since the lockdown. So in a way, I think it plays to that we need to share our learnings and best practice. So how do we reset this system so that it bakes in the inclusion of people with disabilities from the outset? And Matthias, that's where I want to come back to you on your next question. You know, it's heartbreaking for me because we know some of the best practice around disability business inclusion actually happens in SMEs, believe it or not. So, you know, that is such a source and resource of innovation and best practice. So when we're looking at this recovery, what is some of the advice that you could give to governments or to the private sector or to SMEs to take those steps that disability is part of the recovery strategy? Are there any things that you're hearing from organizations or learnings that you would like to share?
Thank you so much. And indeed, as Paul has already said, you know, there are really signs of hope. And the fact that the new normal includes now very much telework, that it is accepted to do working from home, is beneficial for many people who have mobility impairment, right? Who need breaks for medical treatment, who have problems to go to work. So there's a huge chance for bigger inclusion. I fully agree with that. And we need to make sure that going forward in the recovery, that we're not going back to old habits, but we are staying there and that we're accepting these new ways of working. I fully agree with that. There are, of course, challenges for people. If you have, because disabled people, of course, are not a homogeneous group, right? If you have, if you are cognitively disabled, you know, and you cannot do your work online, if you need assistance, if you have mega challenges, right? And the lockdown has been to me for people who are in need of that. Going back to work, of course, we need to ensure with our company members that they are aware of special needs people might have, being at easy stuff like how to reach the sanitizer, making sure that issues, information are shared in ways they can really understand, so they have the full understanding what needs to be done, what can't be done in terms of keeping people safe. All these are issues which need to be thought with when coming back to work. But I think there's a bigger issue, and Paul said to that. There is a danger that because companies are struggling to survive, because government are struggling how to, you know, target and how to address the economic impact of the crisis, that these becomes an afterthought. Yeah. That disability, you know, we lose sight of that. That inclusion becomes a luxury which we cannot look at the moment. And that is where we really need to focus on, because honestly, we had already before the crisis a challenge. SHRM has shown in research that more than 80% of HR managers in the US believe disability is just physical, leaving out a huge group of disabled people. More than 60% of all HR managers in the US never had any training on disability. So already before the crisis, we had a huge challenge with regard to awareness and a huge task to do. Now, during the crisis, coming out of the crisis, with all the other pressure points companies are facing at the moment, cash flow problems, and so on and so forth, there's a real danger that this becomes even more an afterthought. So the key issue is here how to put that on the agenda of policymakers and on the agenda of companies. And this is the whole of society approach. We need everyone. I don't want now to say you have to do this and that. I have to look at my own nose. And as employers organization, we have a key role to play. We have a key role to play as policymaker and social dialogue. We have a key role to play in raising awareness with SMEs, as you have said, and we have to do a better job there. I really must say, we have shown that we have done the job not enough before the crisis, so we have to do better now during and after the crisis. So thank you so much.
I think the thing that I'm listening when I'm hearing from you, so you mentioned SHRM, you know, an organization the Valuable 500 would have worked with. We have the ILO GBDN, we have the IOE. We're listening to Paul, who can represent many different organizations. The key for me is we're having this conversation now. And the idea is that we work together, knowing that it was difficult before the pandemic, but how do we make it safe for people to ask these questions, to share the best practice, to share their fears? But the big issue is now, no more excuses. Because we've seen a business system can reset. So how can we leverage that? And I guess, Paul, that's kind of leads into your second question around, look, you just were at the Global Compact virtual event last week, you know, one of the highest attended. And we've talked about leadership crisis, okay? And we've been obsessed with the Valuable 500, that inclusive business creates inclusive societies. So therefore we need inclusive leadership. Are you hearing a new type of leadership emerging? And what do you believe that leadership, what is a successful leader going to have to do in this new normal to deal with all these issues? And is inclusivity somewhere back in their minds, or is that me being really hopeful?
Well, first of all, I'm very honored to be with two great leaders on this call, yourself, with the good news that even during the crisis, more companies are signing up to the valuable 500. So if you haven't signed up yet, you're really not only missing something, you're putting your company at risk. But Caroline is a great leader. And I'll talk about that in a minute because of some of these wonderful qualities that she exhibits. And listening to Matthias, which I look forward to meeting in person, driving this with passion in the employers organization, which is so important to get it into all companies and not just in the biggest ones, shows real leadership and courage. So I want to thank you for that. We had a great conference last week, one of the many I participated in, but with the UN. I'm so very happy to see that the human side, disability, was discussed and actually is now firmly on the agenda. So you are perfectly right that we know what to do. We have the tools. We actually have the solutions, like we do in climate change. We also do in inclusion and finding the ways to integrate people with disabilities. So at the end of the day, it's about moral leadership. Do we really care? Do we really set the right tone from the top, which is needed here as well? Now, I believe that in the future, more so than even in the past, business is going to compete on trust, on responsibility, and also on the deeper relationships with all their stakeholders, obviously, that is based on truth and based on strong values. And you're starting to see that already in the shaping out of the winners and losers of this COVID crisis. So I would say the bigger words are inclusion, multi-stakeholder, longer term, purpose-driven, and that brings you automatically to moral leadership, in my opinion. People will look increasingly for truthful answers, for wise guidance, for courageous actions, and that comes from leaders that have that boldness and braveness, that courage, which after all is a function of the heart, and the French word cœur, which is the heart and the brain. So it's that combination. Leaders who are realistic, but can instill a sense of hope. Multi-level system thinkers. It is complex out there, and many of these issues need to be tackled at the same time. And it is leaders that understand that because they have a high awareness of what is going on in the world, but also a high engagement of doing something about that. So I think we're blessed with many of these leaders. These leaders are normally, first of all, great human beings, but operate with a sense of humanity and humility, high level of empathy, and are very inclusive leaders. Not surprisingly, in COVID, you see the countries that are doing well, the Icelands, the Norways, the Finlands, the Denmarks, the Taiwans, the New Zealands actually be led by women. So there might be something about that leadership style that we can learn from the gender diversity that we need to drive. But I believe the same is true for people with disabilities. They bring these skill sets at a much higher level than unfortunately we all have collectively failed to deliver. Most important thing is that strong sense of purpose that you exhibit, that Matthias exhibits on this call. That gives us the strength and the courage to go above the things that we thought we were able of. Viktor Frankl said it very well when he said that life is never made unbearable by circumstances, whatever these circumstances may be. And many of us on the call face them daily, perhaps. But life is made unbearable by a lack of meaning and purpose. So let's hopefully, as we recover, now is the time, I believe, for that inclusive leadership. Now is the time to put that purpose in the center, which means de facto putting people in the center, how we restore and redesign our economic systems, and hopefully once and for all, not leave anybody behind. And that includes people with disability above all. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. And that's why I'm here to support you, because you're setting, like a great leader, the tone for all of us.
Well, I'm not actually. I have many people who are working with me, but thank you. Before we finish, I do want to recognize that Stefan Trammell and the ILO GBDN, which actually nearly all of those members are valuable 500 companies. And we see how this community collectively together can make that difference. Nobody is here to do it on our own. We also have many experts and partners who will be listening into this call, like Business Disability Forum and RU Global. There are so many of us around the world trying to make this difference, and it's just really important. And we appreciate Matthias's time and Paul's time, because you can continue to talk to your leaders and your peers. And I think safety in numbers. So can I just say a huge thank you to you both? And I look forward to finding out what's going to happen in a few months' time. So thank you both very much. And Stefan, thank you.
Thank you to you.
No, thank you, Caroline. And also thanks to the translators. I'm always in awe of the people that do the sign language at the speed as we are talking. And they deserve a big round of applause as well. So this is how we do it. Thank you very much.
Yes, colleagues, let me add the thanks that Caroline has already given to Paul and Matthias. I know you all have very busy agendas. Caroline, you have a BBC interview in a few minutes. You've done magically. You have 4 minutes to prepare for that. Paul, thanks a lot for your leadership. Thanks for this very good news coming from UN Global Compact. Thanks for helping to put disability on the World Economic Forum agenda. We need leaders like you. So it has been really great to be able to start this webinar with both of you and of course with Matthias. So again, many thanks. And colleagues, we're now moving over to the second part of the webinar, in which we will have 3 consecutive presentations. So now it's not a moderated discussion like we had now. So we have and we have 3 speakers, and the 3 speakers show very nicely the composition of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. Because one speaker will represent Repsol, one of our global company members. In fact, Repsol is our current chair, the 2020 chair. Second speaker will be a representative from India, from the Indian Business and Disability Network, so different type of membership that we have in the Global Business and Disability Network. And the third speaker in the second section of the webinar is a representative from the International Disability Alliance, the main global disability organization, who will share with us the point of view of persons with disabilities. We've asked each of the 3 speakers to speak for a maximum of 8 to 9 minutes. And we will have, as part of the first presentation from Tomas Malango, Director of Technology Support and Integrated Portfolio in the Repsol Technology Lab in Madrid. Tomas, as part of his presentation, will be using a video. We have discussed the video with the interpreters, and we will just show it full screen and you will have Spanish spoken and with English subtitles. It might not be accessible for every participant, but so apologies in advance for that. So I will now give the floor to Tomas. You've heard Polman mentioning several times that the way out of the crisis needs to be inclusive, of course, but also needs to be environmental friendly. I think the presentation from our colleague from Repsol touches again exactly on that, how to come forward with a way out of the crisis that is both disability inclusive, but it is also responding to the biggest challenge probably that our planet is currently facing. So Tomas Malango, thanks for joining us today, and the floor is yours. And please, you can activate your camera.
Okay, good afternoon, Stefan. Good morning, good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity to explain which our experience under this crisis related to the COVID. As you have mentioned, Stefan, I first of all apologize for the video limitation of access. For sure, this is something we're going to learn from, but I think it's a video that for the people that are able to access to it, it will explain very, very well in a very short time what kind of transformation we are doing here in our facilities, and it will be easier to continue. So please play the video.
Impulsados por la innovación para definir el futuro de la energía, estamos aplicando nuevas metodologías para que nuestros procesos productivos sean más seguros, competitivos y sostenibles, haciendo avanzar a nuestra compañía hacia un concepto industrial en el que la persona y el conocimiento están en el centro de nuestra estrategia de transformación. Un paso más en la automatización de operaciones para dar lugar a la optimización de procesos de principio a fin, aportando nuevas cuotas de seguridad y flexibilidad a nuestros profesionales para que puedan enfocarse en tareas de mayor valor añadido para la compañía, apoyándonos en herramientas tecnológicas de gestión, simulación y producción que sean realmente útiles y mejoren nuestra forma de trabajar, y esforzándonos por potenciar actitudes que impulsen la transformación que buscamos. Ya estamos aplicando nuevos métodos que requieren de la adquisición de competencias en conocimiento de robótica y de tecnologías digitales para la experimentación, así como el uso de herramientas de gestión de la información, trazabilidad de flujos de información y automatización de procesos con RPA, para responder de manera eficaz a los retos de la industria 5.0. A través de programas de desarrollo y capacitación, nos estamos preparando para acceder a nuevos ámbitos tecnológicos y adaptándonos a nuevas tareas e innovadores entornos de convivencia. Un reto para nuestra compañía que, con el talento y la energía de todos, nos ratifica como referente en eficiencia industrial. Para continuar siendo los primeros en acercar el futuro a las personas y responder a nuestro compromiso con la sociedad y el medio ambiente.
Okay, thank you very much. So as I was trying to explain in the video, since 2005 in Repsol, we have been very involved in working on diversity and inclusion. As a multinational company, for sure, we need to make sure that we have inclusion of all kind of diversity. And for sure, and disability is one of them. It's only a part of a strategy. We are a technology-driven company. That means that creativity is important. And it has been shown in the history of human beings that teams with diversity in the formation of a team have better development and challenging situations, for sure. More resilience coming from the people experience and personal life and challenges that have been facing during the time. And finally, the most important thing for us to get this expression of creativity and all this potential for our company is to provide some kind of education and awareness to all our team to understand the importance to have this inclusion in all our team and as part of the diverse elements like age, culture, and so on. During this crisis of COVID, Repsol has faced this situation essentially with three main targets. One has been, for sure, keeping safe everybody, and at this point has been mentioned in the previous conversation from Paul and Matthias. Technology has been key in this activity. It allows us to send all the people from the headquarters and the general offices to work from home without any impact on the productivity. And it also, on the other hand, allows us to reduce in typical presence activities the amount of people that have to stay at work. A good example is our technology center, in which we have labs and pilot plants. We have been running with 10% of people when the people dedicated to that activities are around 40% of our population, which means that some digitalization that we have been running in the last year in the Smart Factory project, which includes virtualization, robotization, and automation of all the processes end-to-end, allow us to remote operate our facilities and for sure eliminate some barriers to access of work and democratize the possibility to work in this critical situation. The second question for us was to preserve the work of everybody. The company has decided to keep all the service stations open to provide the society the energy that it needs, and to keep our operational assets working and to provide this energy to the society, and to maintain all the employees and the company in this situation, which was very challenging for an energy company, as you can imagine. It was a company decision. We feel very proud of that. And that means that all the people, regardless of the situation, the personal situation, have continued working in the company, and it's something that we feel that is going to become a strength for us in this recovery situation that we're going to face in the upcoming months. And the third question was try to help as much as possible solve the crisis. And we do this, for instance, in 3 different ways. One was to transform our facilities here in the Technology Center into hydroalcoholic gel production for the Spanish hospitals that we provide to the capital hospitals during the worst part of the crisis. We donate for sure safety equipment, lab equipment for PCR tests, and finally, we also provide raw material for the production of other safety issues like the facial protection and so on. And now what's coming up next, for us is clear that this is a kind of perfect storm for the energy sector. We are involved in an energy transition moment. We have a huge impact in our business coming from the decrease of mobility around the world during these months. And we are committed for sure, as everybody already knows at this moment, with the climate change. We have with our goal of net zero emissions in 2050. So we need the best talented team to achieve these goals in this tough situation. And that means for sure hire the better people, no matter where they are and which kind of personal considerations they have. We think that is very critical to get the better team. And also, as I mentioned in the beginning of this presentation, we need to have a diverse team. It is very well, it's wide proven in the world and the society, and even moreover in the diversity, in the biodiversity, that diverse teams handle better stressed and unexpected situations. We know that the challenges of climate, the fight against climate change is huge. We need everybody to be in. We need all the ideas, and we need to be ready to unexpected. So, since this point of view, we will still keep including as much as different capacities as possible to our team. We will progress in our digitalization because it improves the safety and first of all our work, but also it enables the possibility to work from home, which is something that has been very well proven that can be crucial in situations like the crisis we have faced during these months. And finally, we will keep pushing the upskilling and reskilling to our people, which enables them to use all this capacity that the technology is enabling, extended as much as possible, and democratizing the access to work that we think is something key in the future. So thank you very much, Stefan. This is
Tomas, many thanks for the good presentation. This link between the changes at the environmental aspects and disability inclusion, we're hearing that more and more. No? The way out of the crisis needs also to be a way out of the crisis that is environmental friendly. So I think that's easier said than done, but I think Repsol is one of the companies that is showing the way on that. We will definitely be continuing to work on just transition, on the employment dimension of what we call in the ILO green jobs. We did a paper last year, which we launched also at our November conference, and we definitely need now to bring all these elements together, green jobs, digital inclusion, and as part of the way out of the crisis. So thanks again for your presentation, Tomas, on behalf of Repsol, as I mentioned, current chair of the ILO Global Business Disability Network. I will now pass the floor to our second speaker of this second segment of the webinar. The second speaker is Sarbani Chakravarty. She is director in the Confederation of Indian Industry, and she also, in that capacity, she's also played a key role in the launch and current functioning of the Indian Business and Disability Network, which was launched early last year and has already in a very short amount of time has done a lot of progress. And Sarbani, who I think does not have a camera with her, so we will just hear her voice and we just see the interpreter. Sarbani will share with us examples from some of the members of the Indian network about how they are including in their measures to address COVID-19. And we know right now India is in the peak of the situation. It's one of the countries with the highest number of new infections. So still in the middle of the situation, while, for instance, here in Europe, we're a bit more coming out of the process with some exceptions. So Sarbani, over to you. And again, thanks for joining us, and especially thanks because it's already pretty late at your end.
Thanks, Stefan, and a very good evening to everyone, and also good afternoon to people on the other side of the world. Yes, it's almost 9:15 here at night. So, so to begin with, to briefly introduce the India Business and Disability Network, it's a national business and disability network set up by CII to serve as a platform for cross-learnings between companies, and also it's a platform for creating and dissemination of knowledge and building capabilities of diversity leaders and mobilizing inclusion commitment at the board levels. Coming to the COVID-19 situation, currently it is unprecedented scenario world over, and yes, as Stefan mentioned, in India with over 4,500,000 cases, and which is like going up and up. We don't see when we will hit the peak. There's also intermittent lockdown happening. So we are going through some major shifts right now. As Matthias Thorns had already shared, that it has severely impacted the small and the medium-sized businesses, and also how the government is like collaborating and trying to support this sector. What I will be sharing about is more about the large-sized companies who are mostly the employers of persons with disabilities in India. What they have done is that most of the employers have set to motion their business continuity plans and are also looking at avenues for the well-being and safety of their employees. Shortly after the government announced the COVID-19 situation and there was a subsequent lockdown across the country around the end of March, the IBDN convened a meeting with all member companies who largely engage and employ persons with disabilities. So we wanted to understand what were their concerns, issues, and also exchange solution ideas. We continued this conversation over the past few months with the diversity leaders of companies and also employees with disabilities. Would like to share some of the key concerns. So the concerns were around the safety of PWD employees, given the fact that they are especially vulnerable in this situation. Concerns were raised on how to mitigate anxiety issues, how companies need to respond to the new situation and effectively engage the employees with disabilities, given that most companies will be having the work from home operational model. The second set of concerns were also around how companies can support the disability community at large, especially those who are marginalized, and also issues of helping PWDs without assistance, ensuring that they get their daily needs, their groceries, the daily necessities, especially when the country was in the lockdown period. What we have also observed is that over the past few months, that companies are settling down into the work from home operational model. There is a shift in discussion. Many PWD representatives are now calling this situation a great leveler, as everyone is feeling included. Where the situation has leveled the playing field between the PWDs and the non-PWDs. However, this is for organizations who were already evolved and had procurement policies from the very beginning. The concept of remote working was already in place, especially for ID companies. And they are, by the way, one of the biggest employers for PWD community in India. And a lot of advocacy was actually already internally happening on providing work from home options for the PWD community. So this situation actually provided them the opportunity to accelerate this transition, and also an opportunity for developing and adopting inclusive technologies. The situation has shifted. Also, what we are seeing is that the discussion has shifted from reasonable accommodation, basically the physical accessibility perspective, and the shift has happened to more towards the digital accessibility. So for example, one of our members, the Tata Consultancy Services, has already started adoption of work from home concept. So what they are now doing is that they are prioritizing creation of digital access for remote working. They are mostly procuring and using apps and softwares which are accessible. For example, all their team meetings as well as external meetings, they have started using MS Teams, Skype, which has an automated transcription feature. They have had a PWD employee resource group. What they have now done is that they have built a PWD team specially, which are closely now working with the IT and the admin teams internally to convey their requirements and advise them on the inclusion features. They are also organizing community connect sessions to understand if all are doing well and have engaged, or they have also engaged a psychotherapist. They're also hosting regular webinar sessions with employees with disabilities, caregivers on mental wellness especially. We are seeing similar online sessions being organized by many other companies like Capgemini, Barclays, and IBM India for their employees with disabilities to understand the virtual work environment as well as mindfulness topic related to tools and techniques and meditation as well. We are also seeing companies developing innovative apps and assistive features and devices, especially to help their employees with disabilities overcome the information gap. So for example, IBM India has launched an employee assistive app specially for PWD employees, which is sharing complete information related to the COVID-19. In addition to inclusive apps in MS Teams platform, Microsoft has also developed the Kaizala app, which is simple and a secure chat app for large groups and work management. It helps in sending instant messages, pictures, documents, so on and so forth. StarTech, a BPO in India, they have developed a digital employee handbook on post-COVID-19 workplace and work at home ergonomics video. Now, StarTech has also shared that they are no more sticking to just one set of official online platform for communication. Rather, they have become flexible, and as per the kind of disabilities of their colleagues, the company is using different online platforms. So these range from Moodle, Slack groups, MS Teams, Telegram for videos, presentations, surveys, etc. They have also gone a step ahead, by the way, and are also conducting e-surveys on engagement level and satisfaction level. They are doing these surveys, of course, through Telegram and SurveyMonkey. Companies in general are also sensitizing and building capacities of their employees to ease out the communication gap. So for example, Sodexo India has developed a guideline for teams to communicate with the speech and hearing impaired, especially in the COVID times, as they won't be able to lip read due to the masks. Some of the companies have even introduced sign language interpreters now on their roles, as well as they are mandating few of their managers and HR teams to undergo sign language training. Now, giving the example of Adobe India, so to help overcome any form of barrier, they have formed a central accessibility team that focuses on PWDs. Appreciating the fact that different challenges have different needs, Adobe India leadership and the management actually asks these accessibility team members to convey the needs and requirement of PWD employees instead of the management deciding the needs and giving the solutions. So almost every organization who are employing PWDs, what we have observed is that they have all established a tracking mechanism and have a dedicated HR point of contact who are proactively reaching out to check for any assistance and engagement pulse level. In terms of assisting the PWD employees, one of our members, the Future Group, which operates some of the India's most popular retail chain, they have rolled out priority delivery services for PWDs across India. So they have revamped their delivery apps to make it accessible for PWDs and also providing special assistance to them. Here, I would especially like to mention that IBDN, as IBDN, we have helped in catalyzing some of the work. For example, the priority delivery of essential products and groceries. This was communicated to the e-commerce players through IBDN. In addition to Future Retails, there's an organization called Big Basket. They are one of the key online grocery delivery providers. So they immediately responded to our call, and they have also started a similar kind of a special service for the PWD community. The IBDN also partnered with Wipro, an IT-based company, and also a disability expert organization to develop a set of guidelines to help employers look at the piece of inclusion during such times. The guideline basically it ensures that all COVID-19 policies by employers are PWD inclusive, and to ensure that employees with disabilities are not discriminated against any way, and measures have been taken for their safety and protection. It's a 12-point guideline, which we have extensively promoted amongst industry members beyond IBDN. Regular webinars have been organized by us, focusing on sensitizing industry and educating them on how to be more inclusive. To support the PWD employees, what the network also did was that we established a free counseling support for, it's a telecalling service basically, which was established for especially for PWDs. The service was being provided by certified counselors, and in the initial 2 weeks, we received over 200 calls from PWD employees. This was through audio, video forms, as well as text messages. Some of the key concerns, this I would like to share very much, is that, how would I access essential and medical services, and how could I access caregivers, especially during the lockdown period? There were parents who were concerned about how to keep their specially able children engaged through the day with restricted movement. There was also a number of calls on dealing with anxiety and fear of losing jobs, salary cuts. There was also a lot of queries were around how do we access online platforms for work. Finally, coming to the direct outreach to the poor and marginalized PWD communities, we actually as IBDN, as a network, we received a number of requests for help. Unfortunately, it has been difficult to attend to all the requests coming from NGOs. Many of the marginalized PWDs are actually daily wage laborers in India, and given the lockdown situation, there have been complete loss of livelihoods. So there were requests for basic necessities like dry ration, daily essentials, medicines. However, given the limited resource we had to prioritize some of the most vulnerable. So we channelized our support towards supporting the leprosy affected colonies across 3 states in India.
Sarbani,
yeah.
would be good. We need to move to the first.
Yes, so I'm actually ending it now. So just to end it, I would like to share that the pandemic has opened an opportunity for companies actually to innovate and be more inclusive and accessible. And as Mr. Polman has said, that companies will have to work harder and be more flexible to ensure that no one is left behind. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sarbani, for all these good examples, and just thank you for sharing some of the concerns that that employees with disabilities and other persons with disabilities have shared with you, which gives us a nice continuation with the third speaker of this second segment, Ilham Yousefian. Ilham, you are the Inclusive Humanitarian Action and Disaster Risk Reduction Advisor of the International Disability Alliance. The International Disability Alliance is the main global disability organization and is also sitting on the steering committee of the ILO Global Business Disability Network since the very beginning of the establishment of our network. So Ilham, thanks a lot for joining us today from New York, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. And I'm so delighted to join this very interesting webinar. It's very difficult to speak as the last speaker, but at the same time, it's really exciting because I have the opportunity to somehow highlight the most important messages and highlight the messages that I think could have been touched a bit more. So we heard a lot about the barriers that persons with disabilities face, and also about the good practices, especially the practices from big Indian companies was very interesting for me. But what I want to highlight as a key message as organizations of persons with disabilities, on behalf of organizations of persons with disabilities, is actually 3 key messages. Number 1 is that everything from the scratch must be done with a participation and consultation with persons with disabilities. And this does not just mean ticking a box. Honestly, participation and consultation has a lot of elements that we need to highlight and be aware of and conscious of. First of all, it should be at all stages. So companies that are employing persons with disabilities, building their workplace conditions, defining new conditions post-crisis, returning back to work, the workplace situation like the electronic and remote ways of work, all of that should be defined in consultation of persons with disabilities and their organizations. And this is not just one organization. You know that people with disabilities are a diverse group. And so this consultation should be also done with the persons with disabilities in their diversity. And it should not just, sometimes we hear that they come to persons with disabilities and their organizations at the very last, and when there is a problem to be solved, asking for a solution. Rather, it would be, most of these problems and barriers could be avoided if this consultation and participation happen at the very stage and at all steps that were taken. So we encourage all companies all the time, all businesses, to consult different groups, diverse groups of persons with disabilities at different stages, and to make sure that this consultation and participation is meaningful. The accessibility is a key. So you can't invite people for consultation when the meeting is not accessible, when the information is not accessible. So they can't provide the real input. I can't highlight this enough, but I want to turn to the second message, which is actually somehow relevant to the first one, which is paying attention to the underrepresented groups. We have women and girls with disabilities who are actually very much represented in small and medium scale businesses. We have persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. We have indigenous people with disabilities and other underrepresented groups whose needs and requirements should be considered with lots of extra attention to make up the historic underrepresenting. So we specifically encourage reaching out to these underrepresented groups and providing the opportunity for them to provide input. And this should be a proactive engagement. So for example, in terms of women with disabilities, we always notice that their situation in the workplace is less considered. This means that they are less likely to be employed, most likely to lose their job, and very unlikely to find a workplace accessible and inclusive. So the issue of underrepresented groups needs extra attention. And I'm not sure how all the measures that have been taken to ensure participation of persons with disabilities and disability inclusive workplaces are actually inclusive of all underrepresented groups. In particular, for example, I want to give the example of persons with psychosocial disabilities. Many persons with psychosocial disabilities may not disclose their disability at first, but due to pandemic and when the crisis is actually happening, some of these underlying conditions may be actually aggravated. They may experience anxiety and depression in a different level from everybody. So we know that everybody needs mental health and psychosocial support during the pandemic and facing the crisis. But I want to draw the attention of employers that many of the employees with psychosocial disabilities that you're not even aware of may develop may experience aggravated psychosocial disability, anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions during the pandemic. So first of all, the workplace, the employer must be aware of that, and they can prepare an environment that persons with psychosocial disabilities or those who are actually experiencing psychosocial conditions can actually step forward and mention that without having the fear of losing their job or losing the position that they have. So this is of particular importance, and I hope that we can see this in the workplace condition, post-crisis workplace conditions, that employers are aware of this group that may now step forward and mention and speak of their psychosocial disability if they find the environment safe enough. And also I want to talk about the workplace environment post-crisis. In many countries, including European countries, in the United States, and many areas, we see that workplaces are just opening slightly, gradually, and people coming back to work. But are with some new, policies and rules to make sure, like, for example, physical distancing and extra hygienic measures. But are these measures inclusive of and accessible for employees with disabilities? That's a question that still, I think we need to talk about it more and more. For example, I have heard from many, in the International Disability Alliance, we talk a lot with people with disabilities from the ground. We document their experiences. And I have heard from many of them talking about how they have gone back to work and have experienced inaccessible new environment. Like, for example, they put barriers without informing a blind person that there is a barrier in this, because to make sure that physical distancing is observed. Or there are like hygienic measures that, for example, before entering the workplace, you need to sanitize your hand here, but that station is not accessible. Blind person don't receive information on that. The station is not physically accessible for those who use wheelchair, and other barriers. So when defining and when introducing protective measures, they should consider the experience of employees with disabilities. And I want to also highlight the attitudinal barriers that people with disabilities may face coming back to workplace. There is unfortunately this message out that people with disabilities are most likely to contract the virus. While this is not the case for many persons with disabilities, for some it may be the case, but not for many. And also there is this false assumption that persons with disabilities, due to the barriers they face, or I don't know, maybe because of the environment, this is the false attitude, quote unquote, they are not able to fulfill hygienic measures like others. So they are most likely to carry the virus. And this is unfortunately the belief that many people may have. Maybe they don't disclose it, but the workplace managers should be aware of such assumptions, should proactively take measures to ensure that these kind of false attitudes are being combated. People receive the right messages about capabilities of their co-workers with disabilities, especially because many persons with disabilities rely on personal support and personal assistance, and they might actually lose that because of these false assumptions. So I want to end up here.
I will need to ask you to get.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to close right now. So these are the points that I wanted to highlight, and I want to thank you for this opportunity to share some of the views of persons with disabilities and their organizations. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you a lot, Ilham. This brings to an end the second part of this webinar. There's still a third part of the webinar, so don't leave us yet. Still we have a bit less than half an hour left for this final part. But thank you, Ilham, a lot for some of the information, for all the information you've given us. I think the need for occupational health and safety measures to be designed in an inclusive way is definitely a key element in the current situation. The examples you have given around mental health, somehow mental health has never been an issue that most companies have dealt with in a positive way, in a proactive way. And you've described this issue about disclosure and not disclosing. One hopefully positive outcomes of this crisis could be that somehow mental health comes out of the closet, because we seem all being much more open to ask each other how we are doing in the current situation. I think there we have hopefully an opportunity to make proactive mental health programs in companies and other organizations much more a rule and not an exception. So let's be positive on that side. Colleagues, I'm now moving to the third part of the webinar. Here we have 4 very short presentations from different members on the screen with a nice bridge at the back of his. So I will give the floor now to Yves Veillet, who is a Global Disabilities and Inclusion Leader in IBM, and was also last year's chair of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. Yves, thanks a lot for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I really appreciate the opportunity you gave me to share one best practice, which I believe is applicable and relevant regardless of the sector of activities we are active in. And I want to thank all the speakers, because I heard and I learned a lot today. So thank you for all and especially for the diversity of the speakers. And so basically what we did in IBM when this COVID crisis started is that in order to limit the spread of the coronavirus, IBM globally put in place a work from home policy in most of the countries where we operate. You know, we have a long tradition of given the nature of our business, it might be easier for IT companies to implement such process. However, in this context, we had to put in place a temporary accommodation process. In addition to our standard accommodation provision procedures to ensure that our employees with disabilities who normally work at the office and who have workplace adjustments would get the equivalent accommodations when working from home. It was an interesting and complex exercise, as you can imagine, mainly because our local and external accommodation service providers were also subject to mobility limitations in many countries due to the pandemic. And so it was quite complex to put in place. But I'm glad to share that once this process was implemented, we got very positive
President of Global Workplace and Enterprise Services in the pharmaceutical company Merck. Don, thank you for joining us, and over to you. Don, we can't hear you, we can't see you. We were seeing you a moment ago. Now, there you are.
Hold on. Can you hear me?
Yes, all good.
Okay, all good. So I think similar to Yves, we started out with what we thought was a really strong playbook. We had a global pandemic playbook. We had a really strong accommodations process. And what we learned is that we had to be flexible and adjust as things changed during the pandemic. We certainly had, we checked with our suppliers and we found out that we were in good shape within the US, but we did find that we had to do some work in Europe, Latin America, and even in Asia, which really kind of created a lot of collaboration internally with our human resources organizations, our procurement organizations, and some of our managing directors in the various countries. So it was a great learning experience for us. And it gave us that real ability to really pressure test a lot of the things that we had written on paper and actually then had to now put into practice. The other thing I want to kind of pivot to, though, is the discussion around mental health a little bit. We absolutely have spent a lot of time in different town hall meetings with senior leadership messages, talking about mental health and what people are doing. Actually, later today, I'm going to be speaking at a Merck Women's Network event where we're specifically talking about mental health in this time. We have created something that we're calling MindWell Champions, which is a strategy team that is really looking at our culture and how we're creating an inclusive and supportive environment that is focusing in on health and emotional well-being and mental health. And that was something that really got highlighted as a need and quite honestly a strength as we've been moving forward in the pandemic. The third thing I'm going to highlight is our interns. We had a large, within MSD, we do have a large intern population globally. And we really, so both kind of the interns that we have internally, as well as some of the ones we work with supply partners with, and relationships we have with organizations like Best Buddies to ensure that we kept employment opportunities for all persons. I mean, like I said, so this is something that we did globally. So, and we were able to really make sure that we set up the right structure and approach so that everyone who we had offered an internship to would be able to work and contribute and learn during their internship program. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Don. It's clear that in the current context, companies that have employee resource groups like IBM, like Merck, are in a better situation, because you can already within your own, with the use of these employee resource groups, you can really sort of check whether your COVID-19 policies are adequately taking into account the situation of persons with disabilities. I heard, for instance, colleagues from Nestlé who could not make it today, but they shared information about their disabled employee network in the US, which is called Thriveability Network. And they were also undertaking a lot of different actions, many of them in the area of mental health. It's clear, and Ilham kindly reminded us that people with disabilities, both people with psychosocial disabilities, but also people with other types of disabilities, because of all the noise around the pandemic and this infection rate and all that, there is definitely persons with disability in general have been faced with an increased level of anxiety because of the pandemic. So I think it's very important to make any mental health activities accessible to all employees with disabilities. No? And Nestlé was also undertaking other activities, but I think the main message for me is it's very important to have these disabled employee resource groups, because they can give you a way of checking whether your initiatives that address the current situation are taking into account adequately persons with disabilities. The next speaker in this final segment is Manisha Mehta. Manisha is a Global Diversity and Inclusion Manager at Unilever. Manisha, I'm sure you have it.
Thank you so much, Stefan. It's always a pleasure listening to Paul and, of course, Caroline, and not to miss out the rest of the speakers. It's been quite insightful, lots of learning. And, as one of the last few to speak, I can only echo what has really been spoken before me by Elham, by Sarbani, by Yves from IBM, by Dawn from Merck. So we have done lots of those things and perhaps along the same lines. A lot of focus on mental health, on well-being, on mindfulness. So a lot of our employee assistance helplines, have seen calls that have been upward of 50% mark compared to the same time last year. So there's been lots that's happened to support all our employees, in maintaining their mental health and well-being as they work from home. But I'll kind of limit this conversation to what we have done specifically around persons with disabilities in Unilever. And like you rightly said, Stefan, the first reach out we did was to our Enable members, which is our employee support network for people with disabilities. It's a global network spread across 25 countries, 14 functions. So we reached out to them to first make sure that they have all the equipment, the medical and grocery supplies if that's affected, any protective equipment they need, sanitization, caregiving allowance, sign language interpreters. So literally all and sundry support that we could offer them that they lacked at the moment to deal with, the sudden change in work from home. We then encouraged our D&I leads in all our markets to do a similar reach out for all the self-reported employees that they were aware of. And in parallel, we encouraged our market GMs and leadership teams to keep mentioning the community in all their weekly town halls. And this was, of course, done to encourage any employee that may not have self-reported, but is in the need currently of any adjustment or help they need. So, we kind of kept pushing out that information through all our channels to make sure that the community is well supported within the organization. And I just lastly want to mention what we're doing at the moment. We're kind of engaging with the network members again to make sure that all their easement concerns are taken in account. Pretty much like LM mentioned, there are a lot of barriers that may suddenly pop up for this community that did not exist before, but have suddenly come into place because of the extra social distancing measures that are being taken due to COVID. And one of the measures that came up for us was from a deaf employee who said that she relies a lot on lip reading. And when we return to work and when people will start using face masks, it's definitely going to impact her ability to carry on work. And that's when we realized we should start engaging the community in smaller groups and make sure we capture all their concerns and barriers. And that's what we're currently doing to make sure that we feed it back to the easement team, which is working globally in timelines and what are the measures need to be taken as employees come back to work. So yeah, thank you so much, Stefan, once again, and I'm happy to share any more points or information on this as needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Manisha. Before giving the floor to the last speaker of this segment, I just wanted to share the information that as ILO Global Business Disability Network, we did a survey among members of the different national business and disability networks. We had 160 companies taking part in that survey and 19 networks. And we were trying to assess how they were including or not persons with disabilities in their COVID-19 response. Telework and flexible working hours came out as the main practices that, of course, were usually there for many employees, but were also particularly relevant in the context of persons with disabilities. More than half of the business continuity plans that companies were having were including issues of mental health, and even more than those directly including persons with disabilities. Many companies and many networks considered and were in contact with disability organizations to better assess how to make their intervention disability inclusive. And in terms of the needs that they express, definitely, and they express that sometimes they would need some government support to be able to continue their commitment to disability inclusion, especially also in a developing country context, support to continue to be able to provide workplace adjustment, and other assistive technologies were some of the things that were highlighted. On a more concerning note, some companies, around 20% of the companies, expressed that there was a certain risk of the COVID-19 crisis having an impact on their disability inclusion commitment, and even some of the national business disability networks had some concerns about whether they would be able to continue doing their work, but hopefully they will all manage. But it's a clear reminder that in this government-designed way out of the crisis, we need to make sure that these networks, these companies that are committed to disability inclusion, get the adequate support. And I think that is very important. So last speaker in this third and final segment is Diane Lightfoot. Diane is the CEO at Business Disability Forum, the most long-standing national business disability network, and a great partner also of the ILO Global Business and Disability Network. So Diane, the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I'll start my video. So thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I think what I'm going to touch on will cover a lot of the themes that have been covered by other speakers, so there's great commonality there. So I really wanted to share with everyone what we've been doing to support businesses at BDF, and also to make you aware of some of the free resources that we have created. So we have created a COVID-19 online toolkit on our website, which we took the decision right at the beginning to make free to everyone, and includes information around employees and also customers. I'm pleased to say that we were actually contacted by the Canadian government, who wants to use it and translate it, so it is also available in French. I will tell you a bit about the toolkit topics. We've also had weekly webinars with guest speakers, and those are also freely available to download on our website. And they include many of the themes that have been touched on, including mental health, including supporting employees with communications difficulties, and one specifically on deaf and hard of hearing employees, one on managing remotely, one on keeping employee resource groups going during lockdown, which was with Kate Nash. That was really positive. And also, obviously, one on tech, but one on carers and how to support people who've got caring responsibilities as well. Our advice service, as you may imagine, has had a lot of queries around COVID-19, and particularly issues, for example, for people who can't guarantee that they can socially distance, either because they are blind or have a visual impairment, or perhaps have dyspraxia or a condition which makes it very difficult for them to measure their proximity to others. So the toolkit itself has lots of advice on supporting people working from home, also around mental health, in how to spot the signs that somebody might not be coping, and around mental and physical well-being as well. And most recently, we've created a new page, which is considerations for business as they move post-lockdown or as lockdown eases, and considerations about how to safely support disabled employees back to the office, considerations around obviously social distancing, but about travel to and within work, and again, for carers as well. So there's lots of information on there. We carried out a survey amongst our members to ask them about what they were focusing on, and it won't surprise anyone to hear that mental health supporting mental health and wellbeing was a huge theme, as was the provision and portability of adjustments, making sure that those were available appropriately, and also issues around actually knowing where and who disabled employees were to be able to reach out to them and provide support. And as we move forward, like others, we are acutely aware that previous recessions have very much impacted disabled people, disproportionately so, and looking at what we can do to prevent that. I personally would like to think that there's an opportunity to rethink what work means, and to build on this legacy of flexibility and a more human kind of leadership and intimacy, in seeing the whole person and looking inside each other's homes, for example. But also, for every business I talk to that says that we don't expect to be going back to the office, there is another that actually the MD or whoever really wants people back and is really very focused on being based in an office. So making sure we don't lose some of the positives. Two last very quick things. One is a concern around the conflation of vulnerability and disability, and thinking about health and safety, whereas someone with a disability may be no more at risk of getting COVID-19 than a non-disabled person. And also, as Manisha touched on, thinking about unintended consequences. So we've just run a survey asking our members if they would be willing to recommend face masks that have a clear panel to enable lip reading. So that's what we're going to be taking forward. So please have a look and use our resources.
Diane, thanks a lot. We will definitely share as a follow-up to the webinar the link to your page. It's great that you have these resources openly available. Colleagues, we are coming to an end of the webinar. We will share tomorrow, if not Friday, the recording of the webinar to all people that attended and all people that registered. I think we had roughly 200 participants at the peak of the webinar. We had another number watching the webinar through Facebook. We will also be sharing the report of this survey that we did among companies that belong to the different national business and disability network. We will also share that in the follow-up to this webinar. We'll show at the very end, once I stop speaking and once Maya stops signing, we will share very quickly an infographic that we've done with the main findings of this survey. But I'll ask my colleague to share it once I finish, so that we have the signing until the very end. The only thing that remains to be done now is to thank you. Thank all the panelists. We had a good number of them in these very different formats. I think that hopefully you enjoyed this combination of moderated discussion, longer presentations, and sort of shorter pills. I also hope that we all got, and Diane was very nice in the way you finished with a very positive message, this sort of towards this new, hopefully more inclusive normal. I must admit that depending on the day and the mood, one is more optimistic, one is less optimistic. I would also say that things will not happen automatically. We need to, as champions on disability inclusion, we need to be at the forefront to make the way out of the crisis disability inclusive. It will not happen automatically, but I think we have the solutions, we have the resources, we know how it's done, but we need, and that's why this focus also on business leadership. We really need the top leaders in our organizations to make it very clear that the way out of the crisis needs to be a disability inclusive crisis, but it's our role to remind, and I think we're in good hands. I mean, today, at least from the webinar, we can see many good hands that will push for that. So thanks to all participants for having been with us. Special thanks to Brigitte and Maya, our international sign interpreters, joining us again. Thank you also to the less visible captionists, and of course thanks to my team here in the ILO Global Business Disability Network, who has, as always, done a great job also from a technical point of view. Let me wish you a good end of the day for those of us who are on this side of the ocean. Those of you who are at the other side of the ocean, you still have a bit to work to do. But keep safe, and looking forward to be back with you very soon. Goodbye. And we're not going to share the screen with the infographic, which shows some of this information.